many of these interviews that I get to do, I'm part of a network group, and this is actually a second or third one that we've had with Shared Connections. And I have to give credit to Jeff because I really appreciate him setting up that network through Shared Connections. And I think this might be the fifth or the sixth one now that I'm thinking about it, that I've met and found incredible individuals. But here's the thing is, like, I always get to hear just kind of the surface or the business side because we're networking. And now, because of this podcast, now I get to actually hear behind the scenes and we get to hear about the journey. And I love the fact that we can share. So Jen, thank you for taking the time to set it aside and share some of these parts of your journey with us.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. And as you said, Jeff connects so many great people together. So always happy to meet with any connection he has.
Yeah, yeah. And I just met him out in Chicago. So whenever this record comes out, we were in Chicago in June, and a great, great dude. All right. So let's go ahead and get started, jump in. Let's start with what we always start with. Who is Jen? And let's say we've got an elevator, I got a minute, maybe tops 2 minutes. So who is Jen?
Yeah. Well, I think in the spirit of this podcast, Jen is still figuring out who Jen is. If you would have asked me 4 years ago, Jen would have told you exactly who Jen was. And Jen is now still figuring out who she is, but I am excited to be a mother of an almost 18-month-old, engaged to my very best friend, and working for a company where I get to help HR across multiple companies, and just really at a good place in my life, and really happy to connect and get to know really great people through networking and really strong connections like that we did with Shared Connections.
I love that. I am going to take a host privilege and we're going to deviate a little bit on the story. We're going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole because you brought something up in this, and I think it's really, really important to touch on. You said you're still figuring out who Jen is. And I love that you said that because that's a very honest, transparent answer. And I know that, especially with all the people that I've talked with, sometimes we know, and you mentioned a whole bunch of really great, awesome things, but yet sometimes there's this part of us that we're still attempting to figure out, and we're still attempting. So can I ask this question? What prompted or what created this whole idea? Like you said, 4 years ago, you were confident and you know exactly who you were. And then all of a sudden, now you're at the stage of, well, I need to kind of figure this out again. So can I ask and maybe go a little bit deeper in that part? Like, why do you feel, is there something that happened that you like, man, I just got to refocus, or I wasn't happy? Like, can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think I kind of fell into that trap that many women and as well as men fall into. If you would have asked me, I would have said, I'm Jen. I'm a district manager for Samsung. It was my work. My work was who I was. And I took a lot of pride in that. Next, I would have told you I was a wife. After that, I would have said I was a daughter. And so there was that order of priorities, but my identity kind of fell into the order that I felt that I was most proud of, the areas where I felt like I was accomplishing something.
Okay.
And
so that's a really great point. And I love that because so many of us identify with what we do rather than who we are. And I think that's a really incredible point. So maybe this transitions into, why do you believe that was your priority? Was that something that was trained into you? Was it something that society said? Maybe it was something as far as within how you grew up. Where did those priorities come from, of saying you kind of fell into that trap of, my identity is wrapped up in what I do?
So I came a little prepared for this because I saw something on social media the other day that just really resonated with me. It said, if you were in the gifted and talented program at your school in the 90s, how's your ADHD, high functioning anxiety, and perfectionist-based procrastination going? Yeah, that's it. That's it. It was society. And
Mm,
I remember being younger and thinking I had all this pressure from my mother. I remember getting a B on a test and thinking my mother's going to kill me.
mm.
My mother was never going to kill me. um, but there was all this pressure that I always, at the time, felt like was my mother, but I think it was looking back more society. And I wanted to be in the gifted, talented program. I wanted to be top of my class. If you made good grades, you were going to go to a good college. If you went to a good college, you were going to have a good career. And you believed that narrative.
Hmm.
That was the path I wanted to take. I graduated high school at the end of my junior year. Um, wasn't the most popular kid in school, but I did really well in school. And some of my best friends in high school were my teachers.
Mm.
Um, and so there was always that wanting to be the best and be seen and viewed as the best. And that then translated into to work where I found myself wanting to climb that corporate ladder.
So can you kind of put that in a nutshell or in a short statement of what that narrative was that you had in your words, you said you fell into that trap of that narrative. Can you put that into a statement or a component piece of how that actually was working? Like just kind of summarize it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. How do you summarize that narrative of this is the trap that I saw or I caught myself in?
Yeah. I think that that trap or that narrative, if you will, was really um, you you do your best in everything that you can do to be the best, to be a success and be viewed as a
Mm,
success. And I think that appearance piece, now that I'm actually saying all this out loud, that appearance piece was a big portion of that as well. Um, it was how do people view you?
mm.
And so if you're doing all the right things, you go to school to get the degree, you get married, then you get the good job. And if you follow that path, you will find success
Hmm.
because people will view you as being successful.
So that's it's an interesting concept, and especially as we look at the definition of success, now kind of tying in this aspect of the beginning of still trying to figure out who you are. What was that shift? What was the situation or the scenario that created this idea that hey, I need to re-examine what I believe success is and what I believe my identity is. What started that path? And I know, just give you the freedom, because it's sometimes it's not just one thing. Sometimes it's a multiple series of events and you start going down. But what was the first of all, what was the biggest mindset shift? And then second of all, what were some of maybe the other things that kind of have helped you redirect that path?
Yeah, so mine is definitely a story that when you hear the initial thing, you think, well, yeah, that impacted everyone. But it wasn't just one thing. It was a year and a half of things. And I actually, before we started talking today, wrote down kind of that timeline for myself because um, 2020.
Mm,
It was a tough one
mm,
for everyone. It truly, truly was. Mine actually started pre-COVID. However, I had been really sick for about a year prior to that. A lot of pain that was unexplained, fatigue to the point I would be driving an hour away and I'd have to stop and pull over and rest. Um, I was exhausted just all the time to the point of tears. Doctors couldn't explain it. I went to specialists. They said it was fibromyalgia. They were testing for MS, all of these things. And um, finally, I went to the doctor one day and he goes, I'm admitting you. He goes,
mm.
don't go home. Go, I'm going to call the hospital. You go. They're going to have a bed ready. So I was in the hospital for 9 days in March of 2020. During that time, my now ex-mother-in-law was by my side the whole time. Um, she was the primary one there for me. While I was in the hospital, COVID hit.
Oh.
So when I went to the hospital, I stopped at the store and bought some socks and some sweatpants, and because I knew that I was probably not getting out in 24 hours. Um, and when I came out, my husband had to get tested for flu, for COVID, for anything that I might be able to get because my immune system was, I had a couple surgeries while I was in there. My immune system was really low. So then here comes COVID. Can't leave the house anyways, but I really had to be careful. Um, then come June, my cousin who was battling addiction moved in with me. I lived in southern Indiana. He was from northern Indiana. Um, Needed to get away from his influences. I lived on a farm
Mm.
in the middle of nowhere. It took us about 30 minutes to get to the closest grocery store. And so he moved in with us, was doing really well. In August, he wanted to go back home, for his birthday, and he did, and then he didn't want to come back down. But he was doing really well. So life moves on. September, my father, who was in an assisted living facility, got COVID. Um, he was doing better. Like 1st of October, I get a call that they're going to release him. He's doing great. I got to go have lunch with him in person at the hospital before they sent him to the rehab facility. I got a call about an hour later that they were sending him to the ICU. Because he tested negative, I got to spend 8 more days with him. Um, but he did pass away 7 days before his birthday, and we buried him on his birthday on October 22nd. Then, in December, I got COVID, and I got a call that my job of 9 years was being eliminated.
Mm.
So that was hard because that's how I identified. I, my job was who I was, and all of a sudden I didn't have that anymore.
Mm.
So I'm without a job, trying to find a job, but we're still kind of coming out of COVID. A lot of people were laid off during that time. And I will say my employer really tried to keep us on as long as they
Mm.
could. We were a field sales team. For
Nice.
months, there was no field to go to, and they kept us on.
Mm.
So I was not, I was hurt, but I wasn't upset with them by any means. January 5th, I get a call. My cousin overdosed and he passed away.
Mm.
6 days later, my barn catches fire. We lose the entire barn. It was an old tobacco style barn. Luckily, the animals were okay.
Mm.
Um, First week of February, we had a hog that we had kind of rehomed until we could get the barn rebuilt, and he caught my front porch on fire.
Oh my
We,
goodness.
we had run to town to get a pizza, and we got a call that our house was on fire. And um, then things kind of took a turn. April, I got a new job. It was a company of only 18 people. So I went from Samsung to this really small company. I was director of sales, and that was a whole new world for me. And
Mm.
that's where my turn started to happen. I was like, wow, I was networking, really finding my groove, meeting really great people, making great connections, looking at writing a book. And it was like I went from trying to climb that corporate ladder to now I'm on this small company elevator and I'm getting up a lot faster than I
Mm.
ever was on that corporate ladder.
Right.
Um, and this also opened my eyes to some other things that had been happening for a very long time. So in June, I actually had filed for divorce. So it was a year and a half that was just
Wow.
truly one thing after another. And I lost my identity and then regained some identity, but it was totally different from who I thought I was. And so, at this point, you ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm still trying to figure it out.
Right.
Now 2 years later, 2.5 years later, I'm a mom and I love that piece. I'm happier than I've ever been. But it took a lot of hurt to get there and a lot of asking myself, Lord, I went to college. I got my undergrad degree. I got two master's degree. I got married. Then I couldn't have children. And why? I followed the path I was supposed to go down to get the things I wanted out of life. And here I am feeling like everything was being taken away. And it just didn't make sense, which really caused me to reevaluate.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of identities wrapped up in with what you just shared. Everything from the daughter to the wife to the caretaker, even with your cousin, and the health and the stability that comes with that. And then getting sick, and then COVID shaking, frankly, the entire world stability because everything changed at that moment. And so, looking at all those, what would you say to somebody that may feel exactly where you were at that time?
Um, I think the biggest thing is it's okay to stop and reevaluate. Um, because I remember being so sick and with where my marriage was, I remember knowing, hey, I went into this for it to be a forever thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna be in it forever because that's what I made vows to do. But I remember days thinking, I hope forever is not really a long time. I I know that sounds terrible. I was never suicidal by any means,
Right.
but I remember thinking, gosh, I don't want to live to 100. And a couple days ago, I was at my mom's assisted living having dinner. Ooh, I take my daughter over there. She's the star of the show in the dining room. They all love her. And we were talking to a woman who's 102. And it was kind of that first moment in my life where I was like, I might be okay getting there. Like, I remember days where I'm like, I don't want to make it to 60.
Mm,
Um, but it's okay to stop, reevaluate. What do you want? Not what path do you think you have to be on? Are you doing what's socially acceptable or are you making yourself happy?
mm. Yeah, it's amazing too when you look at that and see all these different identities that we accumulate, and then society tells us some of the roles that we have to assume. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because there's definitely some good in that, but there's also a lot of pressure to do things and be the certain way that you are when that may not be what your narrative is, right? And so there's a lot of pieces on that have to be reformed. So let's kind of move into what were the steps when you had that, I'll call it a wake up moment of, look, this is not going to work. And you just mentioned I don't want I don't want to live to be 60 in this kind of a path or living this narrative. And you had that wake up moment. What was the first thing that you did to start that metamorphosis, for lack of a better word, or that change that you were really looking at? How did you start on that path? Especially if somebody's looking at a life and they're saying, "Well, I don't even know where to begin." What did it for you? What was that first step that you had to take in order to start this analytic approach or look at your life to say, "How can I change and move in the future?"
I think step one for me was really kind of taking that time to be silent with myself and admitting to myself I'm not happy where I'm at. Um, with that identity of work gone. So let's remove that because it
Yep.
is so many people's identity. Remove that and ask yourself, take that away. What am I happy or am I not? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to change that? Um, And some of those things may be quick moving, some of them may not be. Honestly, once I started on that path of knowing that I needed to make a change, and some of it I was forced into a little bit. Okay, all of a sudden I didn't have this job. Now I had to go find another one. Some of those things were forced on me to be a little quicker than I would have liked, but ultimately, I look back and even with the divorce. as much as I would give anything to have my father back today, without his passing, I don't know that I would have ever felt that I had the strength to have made that
Mm,
change. Um, and so I look back at some of those things now and I'm like, okay, this happened for this reason and this happened for this reason. And it was really kind of putting those pieces together to say, okay, there's a bigger picture here. I got to put the puzzle together though.
hmm
And just stopping and being silent with myself, not worrying about what other people are thinking, what other people need. I'm a caregiver by nature, and that comes with putting other people first and what they think, what that appearance is, um, and just stopping and being silent and realizing I've got to do what I need to do for me. Really transition that.
I would ask too when you're looking at this. You mentioned something in just that short little part of our society so often wants or needs or we expect things to be immediate, and you just said in that little statement there the fact that it does take time. So when you're looking at that, was that part of this assessment and realizing that it was probably going to take a little bit of time? Some things might go quicker than others, or if you how did you handle that kind of an expectation that society places on the quick fix or the just we're just going to make a clean break? How do you handle that kind of an idea?
I don't know that once I was going through it, that really became, I worried about it up to
Mm,
everything kind of being in motion. But once it was in motion, it wasn't about that anymore. Um, I, now, with the divorce, I definitely still wanted to get through things as amicably and as positively as I could, and it wasn't. But I, I gave a lot more than I should. At one point, my attorney said, "Jen, you're not doing that. You're not coming out of this penniless." And I said, "Attorney, I just want out of it. If I'm
mhm.
penniless, I'll recover." It wasn't, for the first time in my life, it wasn't about be as successful as you can, have as much money as you can, have the best title that you can. It was, if you can get back to square one, you can recover from this.
Mm.
But you got to get back to square one first. Um,
How scary is that? How scary is it to consider and think that you've got to go back to square one to start?
Terrifying. It's still terrifying to think about, It's, um, I'm still not back at a place where I'm making what I was financially. So there's there's concerns out there. I'm doing what I can to make sure that I put money back. My daughter already has a green light card and she's
Mm.
got a savings account, and I'm trying to, make sure that I set her up for success. Um, I'm not back at a place that I completely want to be at. But I have the things that are important. I think
It,
when you and I talked previously, I even said, I like what I do now. I don't know if it's my forever home. Whether one day they decide that or I decide that.
right.
Um, because if you would have asked me 3 years ago, I would have told you I'm going to retire from Samsung. Well, no, I'm not. That's not an option. Um, so, I don't know what that future holds anymore. So it's preparing as best as I can for, keeping in mind that long term, but focusing on that short term.
So I want to ask one more question in regards to this, and then we can move on to some of the habits and things that you're doing currently. But because you just mentioned you don't know what the future is, and yet that's one of the narratives that society puts on us, and it sounded like it was kind of also there for you. Is you do all of the right things, you fall into that trap, you act this way, and that creates stability, and that creates a certain future that you can count on. And now you're actually feeling in the way that you're talking is it's completely opposite of that, and you're like, I'm just going to do these things, but I have no idea how it's going to turn out. So how does your mind, I don't want to say balance those two, but how does it actually come to terms with the fact that one side is this is how I had my narrative, I was going to do the right things, I was going to go college, going to get married, going to go do the corporate job, and I I had a predictable outcome according to society, and now I don't. So how do you handle that?
I think for me, having my daughter really changed how I handle that because
Mm,
I think most important for me now is, like I said, handling that short term for myself, but making sure that she knows it doesn't have to be that way.
mm,
Making sure that she knows it's okay to mess up. Making sure that she knows if she's making herself happy, it's accepted,
mm.
whatever that looks like. I want to send her down a successful path, of course, but not one that here's this is predictable by society. Um, I, I think it's trying to rewrite that for future generations, if you will. That sounds very cheeky, but it's not something that I can change from my past, and I wouldn't change my past. My past has gotten me to where I'm at today.
Right.
But making sure that she knows she gets to write her own future.
Mm. And that's an incredible gift to give. So let's kind of just step in and take just a few minutes. What are the habits? What are the routines? What are the actions that you do now on a daily basis to continue this process of what you're doing is rewriting your narrative and looking to leave that legacy? Are there things that are a high priority that I have to do this every day, every week, whatever that schedule is? And what does that look like for you?
Um, I think one of the biggest things for me personally is still taking that time to find those moments to be still and reflect. Setting that time aside, no matter how busy the schedule is, to make sure, am I in a good place? Am I happy? Or do I need to change something?
Hmm.
Because I don't want to get to a place again where I feel like I have to change everything.
Hmm.
Starting over was scary and I don't want to start over again. And so having that constant pulse check, if you will,
Right.
um,
So can
is
I
really
say
important.
can I say that it's actually creating these minor adjustments and these minor shifts rather than having this massive, what we talked about earlier is this massive shift to go back to square one and being scared to death of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm now sitting in my third job in 4 years.
Mm,
Prior to that, I had been with the same company for 9 years. Prior to that, I'd had three jobs my entire career.
mm,
And now I'm like, it's okay if this isn't working, let's find what is working. And that's new to me, which in reality, even that societal norm has changed. The
yeah.
average time with a job is 3 to 5 years now, tops.
Mm-hmm.
People don't go into a job thinking, I'm going to retire from here.
Yep.
That was different for me. My parents both retired from their jobs. Um, and so, yeah, it's making those adjustments that I need to make so that I don't have to get to a place of starting over.
Perfect. And here I'm going to ask one more deep question here, and then we can close this out. But when I talk with individuals and they say, and I tell them like you need to meditate or journal, you need to have that quiet time, I get like the deer in the headlight look, where it's like, what do you mean? And I never did that before, and you get all those. So can you take us through what that looks like, just from a very simple standpoint? If somebody wanted to mirror what you are doing, can you take us through, and whether it's 10 minutes, 15 or 30 minutes, I'm assuming that you have some kind of a pattern, and whether that's writing it down or thinking or journaling or whatever it is, can you just take us through that kind of structure?
Oh, I hate to tell you, it's not a structure.
Well, there's going to be something. I mean, you say you
It's
purposely do that, but I'm glad that it's
uh,
not a structure, because this is really important, because some people are very, very regimented. I answer and I write this amount and I do this, and then other people are like, no, it's not structured. So I'm glad you said that.
I so one of my biggest mentors has a space set up with her notebook and everything that she needs for her morning meditation and journaling session. Um, and I love that. And it sounds so beautiful, but it's not me. Um, I have um, I have those moments when I'm in my car by myself, when I'm on my way to go pick up my daughter from school or daycare. Um, Sometimes it's taking a different route, so I've got an extra 5 minutes on the way home to
Mm,
do that. Sometimes it's getting up in the morning and she's not up, or in the evening she goes to bed around 7:30. Then there's nothing going on, so taking that time by myself. So it's different, but it's that mindfulness to make sure that I'm doing it. If I go a day or two and I realize, I haven't done it, that's when I'm taking those extra 5 minutes on the way home, or the extra 5 minutes to go pick her up. As much as I'm so anxious to get to her and pick her up, like, I know I need that time too. So it's unfortunately not that ideal world of, here's my morning session that I'm going to have. My life isn't at that point yet. One day I'll have that. But right now it's just, whether it be in the car, whether it be, in the shower, taking that time to just ask myself, where am I at?
mm,
Am I happy?
yeah.
Does anything need to change?
So, I'm assuming I don't want to assume, so I'm going to ask you directly. Is it a purpose I am going to take away the distractions, and instead of distracting myself in the evening with a Hallmark movie or whatever else, I'm actually going to think specifically about this and remove those distractions? Is that the way that you operate, or is it you have to have something that distracts you and puts you in a mindset? I don't know.
So I don't do, I say moment of silence, the moments of silence where I try and silence everything else going on in my head, but I don't do well with like a room that's completely silent.
Gotcha.
Um,
Right.
Honestly, right now, the TV's on.
Yeah.
I have it quiet, but that's that, again, that societal, I grew up, we always have to be doing something.
Hmm.
So a lot of times it's turning on Golden Girls in the background, where I've seen every episode 15 times at least, but I'm not paying attention to it. It's on, but I'm focusing on what I need to do. I have a note on my home screen of my phone that are, things that I need to do or think about, or, just notes that I'll make to myself as, I'm leaving work, and I'll go, oh, I need to, take time to think about that or whatever. Um, so I have a place that I go to where I do write those things down. Um, but, like I said, it's when I get a chance to,
That's awesome.
but also making sure not to let life get in the way to not take that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. And I promise I do this. So, what's the one thing that you would want to share that maybe it's on your heart, your mind? Like, I feel like I just really have to emphasize this. This is the one thing I want listeners to take away from our conversation today.
Um, I think, as scary as it is, if you need to start over, start over.
Hmm.
It's been such a happy and enjoyable life since I made those decisions, some being forced, some being selected. But since those actions were taken to start over, I'm happy.
Hmm.
So don't be afraid of one of the scariest things there is. Um, it it'll it may even take a couple restarts, but it'll be worth it. If you're in a place where you're not happy, it's not going to get better if you don't change something.
Yeah, I love that. So, and how can people get in contact with you? What's the best way, especially if something resonated with them and they want to reach out and share, or if they just want to say thank you? How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah. Probably best way is either on LinkedIn.
Okay.
It's but Jen Pointer is how I'm listed on LinkedIn, and I can send that link to you as
Yeah,
well.
we'll have that in the notes
Um,
for sure for people. So if you're listening, those in the car, and you need to go back to the notes, we'll have the link directly to the LinkedIn to send a friend request or be able to connect with you in that manner.
and also my email, jkpointer@gmail.com.
Perfect. And we'll get that there too. So awesome. Well, again, thank you
Right.
for being with us. Thank you for sharing. I know some of these things are not always easy to share, especially as you walk through them and you can feel that pain come through. And so I just thank you for the authenticity. I thank you for being transparent and actually walking or allowing us to walk with you on part of this journey. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me. I certainly appreciate it. And, there's still things that as I talk about them, they still hit like it happened yesterday.
Hmm.
Um, but it always helps talking about them and sharing, and hopefully others can gain some perspective. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Absolutely. So, for those listening, man, I love the fact that we can share these things. And I say this from the bottom of my heart. And I know this is every person that we have on here. If something touched you, if something just had the resonating with your soul, or if something you did that you implemented and changed, please reach out either to myself or Jen. I don't care which, but I know that we like to hear that because we know that we've touched your life or we've had some kind of an impact. And that's the goal of narrative. It's the ability to be able to change those false narratives and write our new narrative. And until next time, I guess I just say this is keep writing and crafting your narrative, because each narrative is just as important and yours is special and unique to you.